น In Session, mezclando Carlos Grau, Valencia.
เชิญแขกผู้ทำหน้าที่ได้เลยครับ
สวัสดีค่ะทุกท่านตอนนี้นะคะงานของเรากำลังจะเริ่มขึ้นนะคะในอีกไม่กี่นาทีนะคะเราจะเริ่มตรงเวลาตอน 10:30 นาทีนะคะถ้าเกิดว่าใครเดินไปเดินมาแถวนี้อยู่นะคะสามารถหาที่นั่งแล้วก็เตรียมการเริ่มงานได้เลยค่ะขอบคุณค่ะ
In session, mezclando Carlos Grau, Valencia.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the third ASA International Forum 2022, which is a part of Architect Expo 2022. This event marks the 34th anniversary of Architect Expo. As we all know that the COVID pandemic changed our lifestyle completely, so we keep organizing Architect Expo for 2 years. This year, we are back even stronger, under the leadership of our co-chairman, from the north, northeast, and south of Thailand. So this is the true representation of Thailand as a whole under the theme Co with Architects, Co with Creators, collaboration between architects and others in creative industry. My name is 𝗕𝗲𝗁𝗔 𝗜𝗁𝗂𝗆𝗆. I'm very pleased to be your MC of today's event. And on behalf of the Association of Siamese Architects under royal patronage, we would like to welcome you to the 𝗥𝗲 International Forum 2022 under the name of 𝗥𝗲 International Forum of Architect 22 in New Normal. Seeing our participants' safety is our first priority. So the Association of Siamese Architects under royal patronage will host 𝗥𝗲 International Forum in hybrid format. So you can see the online session broadcast via Zoom or Facebook page search งานสถาปนิก 𝗥𝗲 Expo or YouTube channel อาสาสมาคมสถาปนิกสยามในพระบรมราชูปถัมภ์ or register on www.aksaexpo.org/forum. So you are able to switch into another language by selecting the channel both in Thai and original sound in English on Zoom program. And the open ceremony will begin now. I would like to invite Mr. 𝗔𝗦𝗔 President of the Association of Siamese Architects under royal patronage, to give his welcome speech. Please give a big hand. Thank you.
Dear distinguished speaker, honored guests, and all forum participants. I am 𝗔𝗦𝗔, President of the Association of Siamese Architects under royal patronage. It is my honor to welcome everyone to 𝗥𝗲 International Forum 2022, Co with Creators. The integration of distinctive characteristics, skill sets, and work method of profession with different expertise deliver collaborative and creative outcome. Through adaptation, learning, and search for new possibility, everyone is both individually and collectively a part of future of architectural design. Architecture has always a result from co-creation. It relies on collaborative contribution of many professions, from landscape architect and interior designer to engineer and contractor with different expertise. To this day, the boundary of collaboration is being expanded, with architecture adapting and its role to best cater to user demand and constantly changing social and cultural context. Architects are now working with creators from other disciplines such as artists, product designers, photographers, fashion designer, chef, agriculturalists, doctors, and several other professions, even those who seem to bear no connection with architectural work whatsoever. However, these creators' distinctive potentials and nature are being fused to the design development process, consequently giving birth to a new way of learning, exchanging, interpreting, questioning, and finding the answer together. Such a process eventually creates fresher and more interesting work of architecture. For 𝗥𝗲 International Forum 2022, the Association of Siamese Architects is fully aware of ongoing COVID-19 situation and consider the safety of all participants to be top of priority. Therefore, this year's seminar will be both online and on-site. We also believe this seminar will be a great chance to welcome audience and speakers from countries around the world to share their thoughts and input on this discussion of co-creation. The Association of Siamese Architects under royal patronage would like to thank all distinguished speakers from various countries who have come to share knowledge and discussion. We can broaden the horizon of new architecture possibility, though about by collaborative design process involving collaboration, contribution from other professions, and many more. Please join us to open up new perspective together in ASAD International Forum 2022. Thank you and สวัสดีครับ
Thank you very much, Mr. 𝗔𝗦𝗔 𝗵𝗂𝗏, President of the Association of Siamese Architects under Royal Patronage. And may I please invite Mr. 𝗔𝗦𝗔 Chairman of ASA Forum 2022, to give his opening remarks. Please give a big hand.
Sawadee krab. Welcome to ASA International Forum 2022. My name is 𝗔𝗦𝗔 I am honored to be the chairperson of ASA International Forum this year. ASA International Forum is a platform that fosters dialogue between academics and the practice of architecture. It is knowledge-sharing initiative that bridges the gap among many peripheries of architecture and related professionals. Every year, a chairperson and his or her team diligently curate, select, and invite speakers from around the world to assemble in one of the premier architectural exhibitions and conferences simply named Architect. Under the theme Co with Creators, the Architect 22 also seeks to bridge the architects and the other professions with collaborative projects to create the next possibilities in architecture. With this as a principle, the concept for the ASA International Forum was interpreted as Co with Architects, Co with Architecture, where architects and academics of architecture, architectural critics, engineers, and craftsmen are interwoven through the works of our esteemed speakers. This year, 5 distinguished speakers honor ASA International Forum: Professor 𝗕𝗲𝗏, the architects from Ibuku, Mr. Aaron Betsky, who is here with us this morning, Samuel Barclay, and Fala Atelier. Being the chairperson of ASA International Forum is an honorable but arduous task. It is not possible to do it alone. I would like to give a special thanks to 𝗕𝗲𝗁 𝗔𝗂𝗏 for being an amazing co-thinker and partner throughout our journeys. I would like to thank all the ASA staff that have been a part of ASA International Forum 2022, especially Ms. Salila Tagul-Wet, Napatsaka Mark, and 𝗕𝗲𝗁 ASA Forum wouldn't be successful without you. Thank you, our moderators, Pratana, Kirapitanon, and Professor Tonkao Panin. Our moderators dedicate their time of doing research for weeks on end for their rather short Q&A sessions, which I prefer actually to have it to be longer. Lastly, I would like to thank 𝗔𝗦𝗔 𝗵𝗂𝗏, the president of the Association of Siamese Architects under Royal Patronage, for trusting me with this honor, and the chairman of Architects 22, Rashid Rajan Ahmad, Israsi Arirab, and Pongpon Yuttarat, for your consultation and guidance along the way. I trust that ASA International Forum 2022 will be enjoyable and beneficial to the Thai architecture profession. ขอบคุณครับ
much, Mr. 𝗔𝗦𝗔 Chairman of ASA Forum. And next, I would like to thank our sponsor for their contribution at this forum. So please welcome Mr. Yang Su, President of 𝗕𝗲𝗁 BlueScope Thailand Limited.
Thank you. Good morning, Sawadee krab. It's a great pleasure to be here at this event. And BlueScope has been operating for almost 30 years in Thailand. We built our first factories in Rayong in 1995. Over the last 3 decades, we have committed to improve the life of the communities surrounding us by making the buildings more reliable, energy efficient, and more beautiful. And we've been fulfilling that commitment through a very important means, that is support and collaborate with the architect and the creative communities surrounding us. The Design Award 2021 is a very good example of that. In addition, we also provide media support, factory tours, and the various informative seminars. These activities are aimed to help uncover the potentials among our young architects and young creators, and also support their development. And doing so, we hope they can help to make Thailand a more beautiful place for all of us to live. Thank you, and Sawadee Krap.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yang Su, President of the NS-BRSCOPE. And please stay on the stage. We will have a beautiful photo session. So may I invite Mr. 𝗔𝗦𝗔 𝗵𝗂𝗏, President of the Association of Siamese Architects under royal patronage, on the stage. And then Mr. 𝗕𝗂𝗶𝗵𝗺 𝗁𝗂𝗏, Chairman of ASA Forum, on the stage. And also 𝗕𝗲𝗏𝗵𝗺, our speaker for the next session. And 𝗕𝗲𝗁𝗃𝗀𝗏 𝗃𝗀𝗏, our moderator on the stage for the photo session. Okay, the middle camera. Okay, so we're going to change the background. And I would like to invite more our co-chairman for the ASA Expo. So let me have, okay. The video first, sorry. Okay, คุณราชิต ระเด่น อำมาตย์ ค่ะ คุณ อิสรา อารีรอบ คุณ ปองพล ยุทธรัตน์ and also อาจารย์ นิลปัตย์ ศรีโสภาพ lecturer and head of Department of Architecture, Faculty, Architecture, Urban Design and Creatives, มหาสารคาม University, for this session. And after this, we have the first session with 𝗕𝗲𝗏𝗵𝗺. We have so many virtual backgrounds, so we're going to change the background first. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. So you can raise. Before we go to the first session, please be informed that all handouts and documents regarding the ASA Forum are available on website worldwideWeb.arsaexpo.org/forum. And all participants are invited to send the questions in the Q&A chat box. For the last session, our moderator and distinguished speakers will on call to discuss and answer your fascinating questions. So this afternoon session, we will have a very interesting topic also, started with Mr. Samuel Barclay with Craft of Collaboration. And our first session will be 𝗕𝗲𝗏𝗵𝗺 in the topic of Just Don't Build, Reimagine, Rethink, Reuse by 𝗕𝗲𝗏𝗵𝗺. He is a professor at School of Architecture and Design, Virginia Tech, and คุณ ปรารถนา เกียวปฏินนท์ will be our moderator. So I would like to give you more about 𝗕𝗲𝗏𝗵𝗺. He is an American critic of art, architecture, and design. He is currently the professor of Virginia Tech School of Architecture Design. He is internationally known as a lecturer, curator, reviewer, and commentator. He was the director of the 11th Venice Architecture Biennale, and he has also been president and dean of the School of Architecture, Taliesin, director of Netherlands Architect Institute and of the Cincinnati Art Museum, as was founding curator of architecture design and digital projects and San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. So if you are ready, 𝗕𝗲𝗏𝗵𝗺 are ready, so please give a big hand for 𝗕𝗲𝗏𝗵𝗺. Okay. Maybe the microphone? Okay, it's better, thank you.
Because I'm so far away from you. Now The microphone is working?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy that some of you have joined us in person, and I guess a few more of you are somewhere out there in the ether. I'd like to thank the president of the ASA and the chair of the session for their hospitality, and thank the ASA in general for the great honor of inviting me to come back to Bangkok and to try to share a few thoughts with you. The danger, I think, of coming in as someone from very far away to talk to you about architecture is that it will always seem like I'm someone who's coming from far away and who doesn't understand the local problems and conditions. But on the other hand, I think that we all also have to realize that many of the conditions in which we live and operate, both as designers, as architects, and as citizens, as human beings, have, of course, not only become very much the same, but have for a long time been very much more the same than we would care to recognize. That is not to say, however, that there is not a fundamental specificity about every situation and every condition. So you will please, I hope, indulge me if I speak from the perspective of the United States, of a critic, of a Hokie. There's only one person here who will know what that means. And as someone who is trying to figure out what is going on in our world and how architecture can help us create a future that is more sustainable and more just and socially open and more beautiful. Those are the three criteria I look for. And in doing that, I try to look beyond buildings. I try to look at a wider or perhaps more complex way at understanding our designed and built environment. And that is because architecture is a strangely very limited way of creating good buildings. Or to put it the other way around, to create great architecture, you might have to go beyond buildings. Now, that might be a confusing statement because most of us associate architecture with buildings. We think they are very much the same thing. But in fact, buildings are buildings, and we are sitting in a building. Or in English, building as a verb means to build. And architecture is not that. Architecture is everything that is about building. It's how we talk about buildings. It's how we understand buildings. It's how we design buildings. It's how we represent buildings. It is, if you will, the meta of buildings. And that distinction is important not just for semiotics, but also because it is increasingly difficult, it always has been difficult, to make good architecture with buildings. First and fundamentally, because buildings are produced as a service for clients. And the clients for architecture are almost by definition those people who have enough resources to be able to commission them, which is to say that the architects always find themselves building for the social, political, and economic status quo and furthering their values, their priorities, their beliefs in built form. Architects find themselves in a very interesting position trying to be critical, trying to do something that they think is right, even as they are working on commission. But these days, it's even more difficult because so much of the making of buildings is established by codes, by building codes, of course, by life and safety codes, in most places by zoning codes, though Bangkok, which seems to be a kind of strange mixture between Houston and Hong Kong, doesn't seem to have many zoning regulations. Be that as it may, there are still many, many regulations that reduce your ability to make buildings. But more than that, of course, there are the economic codes that tend to make it difficult for architects to do anything other than to build something with a minimal means that will create the largest income as quickly as possible for whoever is commissioning it. And these days, of course, even beyond that, there are all the computer codes that semi-automatically produce buildings. Now here in Bangkok, I noticed you still have found some ways around it. There is a way here of concentrating the architecture in a scrim or screen or some decoration that is put onto the buildings that becomes the sign of architecture in front of a building that is very much produced according to very standard codes. That scrim itself becomes a sign not only of architecture, but of the limits of architecture. The architect 𝗕𝗲𝗄𝗆 many years ago said, the architect has 1/4 of an inch, a little less than a centimeter, to be able to make architecture, and everything else is set. Now, the irony is that there actually is a much greater impact that architecture makes in other ways. We all remember and see architecture in many other ways, and I really noticed this when I was working with my students. And for the first time in many, many years, I am teaching undergraduate students, so students who are 17, 18, 19 years old. And I came to realize, which I sort of knew already, but even more clearly now, that most architects who are younger than me have grown up being impacted by a very specific kind of architecture, which is the architecture, I think I can be very specific about it, of Harry Potter and Game of Thrones and all of the fantasy lands that are produced in books, in movies, in television series, in TikTok, in all of the other media that now surround us everywhere. And my students said to me that they came to architecture school because of this, because this was their dream of making architecture, that they had grown up with a particular kind of architecture that they wanted to further in their work, whether consciously or not, and it only became conscious when I inquired about that. And of course, it's not much different for old people like me. We grew up with particular movies and television series and books that gave us the possibilities of an architecture that was another world, a better world, a fantasy world, a mythic world, a world that we somehow wanted to be able to build. And of course, these days, that world is not just the fantasy that happens in the past, but it's a fantasy of the explosion of space, what Walter Benjamin, to get pretentious about it, called the explosion of the 1/10 of a second, that completely blows open the possibilities in space, in form, in color, in composition, and this is, I think, very important, of social relations that we can have in these kind of spaces. And it's lovely that I'm giving this talk in front of this kind of green screen, and I'm imagining that for those of you at home, I'm actually fighting dinosaurs against this green screen, because all of these kind of realities are so much more powerful, so much more alive than architecture, which is not to say that I don't love architecture. It's just to say that this is a complete world, and I love showing these images because for those of you that have a long memory, and I like to play this game, but maybe I won't this time, of figuring out who knows what this top image is from. Actually, I should just quickly see if anyone knows what it's from. No one knows what it's from. It's too old already. It's about 6 years old. It's Guardians of the Galaxy Part 2, a terrible movie. But at the end of the movie, there's a world, another world, that is a whole planet. It's an integral, what we might even call organic form of architecture. And it is also the brain of the person who has invented it. It's a landscape that is infinitely small, infinitely large, completely connected. It's a whole world that exists at all scales. And at the bottom, of course, we have Wakanda, the image of an alternate reality in which black people actually invented all the good stuff and have been able to create a much more just society. This is what my students want to build, even if it doesn't quite look like this, even if it looks more like a gaming environment. And I bet you that most of you, if you closed your eyes and thought about it seriously, want to create not just one beautiful house or a skyscraper where you manage to get a little bit of architecture out of your evil client, or your good client, as the case may be. But if you close your eyes, you really want to do something so much more. You want to make a total reality, to make an architecture that is another world, a more just world, a more sustainable world, a more beautiful world. That is what architecture wants to do, but this is what we get. This is the most perfect building built in the last 10 to 15 years. One of the most expensive buildings built per square foot. It is the absolute omega of architecture, the end-all of architecture, the perfect circle, the zero that ends everything. A complete environment in which even the glass is so perfectly milled that not only do millions or thousands of birds kill themselves every year, but they have a special hospital for all the people who walk into the doors of the endless corridors of the Apple headquarters, which is what this is. Almost $2 billion worth of architectural perfection, the endpoint of architecture. And I have no doubt that right in the middle of this panopticon, this absolutely perfect building, Steve Jobs is buried and is still secretly running the most valuable company in the world. This is the best that architecture can achieve in today's reality, with the most indulgent client, with the most money you can imagine, with the best technology. This is absolute perfection as it can be made in a building, except that even before it was finished, Apple had to build this piece of fill in the dots down the street because the headquarters was already out of date. The functions had changed, there were more people. There was no way that this building could address the reality of the richest, most powerful company in the world. Architecture, when it resorts to buildings, finds itself lost. And in response, it really flails around, trying desperately to figure out what to do. I referred to Tadao Ando's pouring of tons of concrete inside the old Bourse in Paris as what a dog does to a lamppost to show that the dog has been there. It's architecture showing its ability to do something. And if you can't do it with that kind of grandeur, you create the kind of default modernism, the kind of reduced sculptural massing of glass and steel and concrete that waste huge amount of resources. This is an example in Philadelphia, but I've seen very similar parts of Bangkok. And anywhere in the world, you get architecture that either tries to be heroically different or tries to be standard, functional, forgettable in every aspect, so that when you look up as you're sipping your Starbucks, and of course it has to be a Starbucks, at this environment, you find yourself not in the dream of architecture, but in the dystopian reality of what our world is becoming. And underlying all of this is a reality that really hit home to me driving here this morning from somewhere sort of in the middle of Bangkok out to here, and that is the reality of sprawl, of the fact that the social relations that used to create a coherence, that as it became ever larger, became an urban environment that we hold up as the ultimate goal of architecture, to produce this kind of world, has turned instead into this miasma of dwelling that reach from here all the way halfway across Thailand, from New York to Timbuktu, that is this endless grid that connects everything and everywhere, that has no particular order other than this kind of cancerous growth of cells that leave no outlet, and the endless reproduction of absolutely the same, whether it's in the United States in single-family homes, in parts of Asia in apartment buildings, or whether it's what I woke up to in my hotel room for the last 3 mornings, this mixture of very dense, low-rised, undesigned structures with the kind of B-team products of internationally focused architecture firms creating structures that are completely closed off from their environment and could be anywhere. Sprawl in Bangkok is one of the worst anywhere in the world if you do a little bit of research. The growth of this city of now 10 or 11 or maybe 12 million people reaches for a good 50 kilometers in every direction. I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. And it has this strange sense of no particular center, only these kind of edge cities like the one we're in right now, and the kind of reproduction of form without social relations, without any kind of coherence that by design furthers a society that can be sustainable, that can be open and just and fluid, and that can be beautiful. And at the core of what is making this work more and more is warehouses, is the fact that our society is defined by the continual movement of goods and people and information, even in the time of COVID, and the only and most monumental structures that make all of this cohere and work are the giant warehouses that house everything for which we have no room, or that we want 2 hours from now, that will bring us all of the artifacts and all of the sensations that we use in lieu of establishing social relations. And the interiors that are left are these kind of blank and completely affectless environments. Again, probably no one understands this. I need to replace some of these images because this is also by now 7 or 8 years old. This is, anyone know what this is? I'm really showing things that are outside of this audience, I can tell. This is the video for the first single by Lorde. And the irony is that here is this 19-year-old New Zealand singer talking about being lost in suburbia with a video that was all shot in Southern California. But of course, it could be anywhere. And does anyone know what this is? If you don't know what this is, you need to be watching this right now. Anyone know what this is? Euphoria, thank you very much. The most beautiful, haunting terrifying, gorgeous product of popular culture right now, which presents this completely fluid world in which one's state of mind on drugs or without drugs, one's sexuality, one's social relations, one's age is completely fluid and reforming itself continuously, very much in this kind of idealized world that could be a science fiction movie, but now playing itself out through the endless play form of suburbia. And the other side of this is, of course, Better Call Saul or Breaking Bad, the two most dystopian images of American life. And what's especially ironic about these images, when I went to go find them, I Googled them, of course, Google, another form of sprawl, and I was immediately referred to two different companies that would give me a tour of Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is where this series was filmed, and show me all the sites where the scenes took place, which is completely contradictory, because the whole point of that series, for any of you that have seen it, is that in that house there might be a standard family living its normal life, there might be a drug dealer, there might be a laundry, there might be a small manufacturer, there might be 40 people crammed into the same house. It is all completely the same everywhere. And what makes all of this work is not architecture, is not all of the skills and knowledge that we as designers have to create order, to create coherence. What makes it work is signs. Signs that tell us where to go and what to buy. We live indeed in the empire of the signs, and what really controls it and keeps it together and in check is the fact that everywhere, always, Big Brother is watching us, is controlling everything we do. Rem Koolhaas has this famous statement that all conditioned space is conditional. As soon as you enter into a structure that provides you with the technology and with all of the affordances of daily life, you subject yourself to the controls of a society that when crisis comes will bring all of its implements of architecture to bear on keeping you in check, keeping you completely in your place. Of course, that breaks down, that falls apart. And I love this image because it really shows the lost dreams of architecture, but also the possibility of capturing a kind of space. This is from 2 summers ago during the crisis after the murder of a black man in Minneapolis. This is in Detroit. In the background is one of the great science fiction projects of modern architecture, the Renaissance Center by John Portman, a collection of luxury office buildings, the headquarters of what was then one of the largest companies in the world, Ford Motor Companies, and a hotel and shopping mall, all of it in this completely isolated bastion protected by parking garages with a gate in the middle that could be lowered when any kind of riot such as this broke out. It is almost completely empty, 20% occupied, sitting marooned in the middle of nowhere. And in front of it, the people have taken back over. The avenues, the streets that are meant to only get you into places have become places of gathering. And I love the symbolic element here on the side of Joe Louis's fist. This is a monument to a black boxer who is the most powerful boxer of his time. And instead of someone on a horseback, instead of a king or a queen standing there ruling the world, it is the fist, the power that is suspended in space, while in front of it, people have taken over the street and created a kind of amorphous new kind of reality. This is where architecture begins, with this kind of takeover of space, this kind of reimagination of space. Where to start with that? Well, we have to realize that everything that I've been talking about, the contrast between what we think of as architecture and the realities, is symptomatic of the complete dissolution of social relations that Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels predicted almost 2 centuries ago, when they said that all that is solid will melt into air. And in fact, now all that is solid has melted into the internet and into the completely global relations of zeros and ones that mean that we are everywhere and nowhere at the same time, and that feed, of course, all of that money into Apple so they can produce its failed architecture. Not only that, but it means that what used to be at the core of architecture, the measure of what we think of as building, that which gives the proportion, the focus, the framing of the activity of architecture, is now uncertain in its status, uncertain in its sexuality, uncertain in its identity, but more than that, uncertain even in the technology or the biology of how it is made up. So if we are going to begin by reorganizing our world and trying to figure out how to make ourselves at home in this completely fluid reality, perhaps the most logical place to start is to start with the power that the computer gives us to create any kind of form that we can imagine, and then through the magics of BIM, translate that actually into built form. To think of architecture as the collection of all of the potential forms and images and tools in our reality into a new kind of reality. And of course, we have been doing this for quite some time, producing grand public spaces like this beautiful new high-speed train station in Kowloon, shaping our new structures into these completely fluid objects that are maximized by the magic of zeros and ones to create the most efficient, most connected, most continuous reality you can imagine. And it even happens right here in Bangkok. It's kind of telling that as I was trying to find a good image of this, I know that this is real because I took this image myself a few days ago, but I have no idea whether that is actually an image from the architects from Amanda Levette's presentation of the building, or whether that's actually a constructed photograph. I think it's the latter, actually, the former, sorry. But this is the kind of possibility that computers give you. But the problem is that what you wind up with is nibbling away at the corners of our reality, creating openings and spaces and fluidity for the very rich to cantilever out above the city, to slightly work at the facade of an otherwise extremely tall and very normal, though elegantly detailed building. And I actually was trying to find the right image, because the same software that produces this kind of architecture produces the latest Mercedes-Benz and Porsches and other cars. It's about maximizing and selling the maximization of form. And the problem, of course, even more than that, is because there are no standards, there's no logic to it. You get the kind of sprawl of images on top of a skyscraper. One pediment is good, 2 is better, 3 is the best, and if you could have 4, it probably would be superlative. This kind of excrement of architecture that has no actual ties to reality. It is just the result of the productions of zeros and ones. So if that is true, and if we are going to use the computer, if we are going to use the possibilities that we now have to translate, transform, and critically, and I would hope catalytically alter our reality, why think of it as just a nibbling away at our forms or a streamlining of standard shopping malls, office buildings, hotels, and condos? Can we rather think of the possibilities of the computer to create a different type of reality, a remixed, a reordered, a collage version of reality? This is one of my favorite, fairly recent buildings. This was done by Winnie Maas of MVRDV, firm in the Netherlands. And Winnie Maas grew up in this very small village called Schijndel. And one day he got a call from the mayor of this small village and said, "Mr. Maas, you grew up here when you were 9 years old. You made a drawing and said, this is what our town square should look like. And you sent it to the then mayor. Luckily, he kept that drawing. And now that you are a very famous architect, we would like you to come back and actually redo our town square. There's only one problem. To pay for doing that, we have to build a shopping mall in that town square. And the further problem is that no one wants a shopping mall on that town square." So Winnie Maas went to the small town with a very good photographer, Bas Prinsen, and they photographed every single building that's there in reality. All of the houses and farm buildings and warehouses and everything else that was there. They brought it together in the computer. They created the prototypical archetypal building of this small town. They blew it up 120% so it could fit all of the shopping mall, and then they printed it on glass so that you have a sense that architecture can both represent and disappear, can be a way of making something present and at the same time being a ghost of what was there in the past. And I'm grateful to Scott Drake, who yesterday gave me these images of a building in Australia that has done exactly the same, where they wanted to tear down a heritage building. They wouldn't let them, so instead they preserved the heritage building as a photograph printed in front of the new structure. I am increasingly interested in architecture that tells stories, that brings together an order, a logic, a beauty in this sprawling reality of ours, using digital media to create concrete, evocative, and at the same time elusive versions of possible other worlds. This is an artwork by Doug Aitken, who was given the facade of the Hirshhorn building, one of the ugliest museums in the world, on the American Mall. And he projected on 360 degrees images collected from Los Angeles of container ports and no-tell motels and apartment buildings and all-night diners and alleys and department stores and every other part of the sprawling reality of Southern California. He projected it on this building so that the structure went away and put it all to the sound of a song called "I Only Have Eyes for You" from the 1960s, sung by both very famous people like Tilda Swinton and people on the street, a love song to everything that you can see with your eyes in this sprawling reality. And the symbol for this ability for me is this series that was done by the Japanese photographer Hiroshi Sugimoto when he went to some of the grand old movie palaces built in the 1920s and 30s, and he trained his camera at the screen and then left the shutter open so that all of the car chases and love scenes and arguments and fights that were in this movie disappeared into nothing, into this perfect modern emblem of the white that contains everything and is at the same time nothing, that is only the memory of everything that has gone on. It is a perfection that can answer to the Apple building. except that the more you look at the white screen, the more your eye starts to wander at all of what remains, all of the decoration kissed by the light of the screen, brought to life in the camera, the reality of this shadow world, this memory of a place that still exists, that surrounds the screen itself. So I find myself looking more and more at artists and architects who do no more than take a little piece out of a building and let us look at the history of what is there, that give us an empty room where absolutely nothing seems to be going on until we look carefully at what has been padded, what has been altered, what has been changed in this other white room. What we are left with in the work of someone like Do Ho-soo is the ghost of architecture, its memory that haunts us to the day with the possibility of physical form even in a world that is completely dominated by TikTok. So to be slightly more concrete about it, I am particularly interested in an architecture that is a reimagination of what already exists. Not just a renovation or a restoration, although that is important, but a reimagination, a re-evocation of reality, of what is at the core of architecture in this completely fluid world. And I have a very concrete reason for that as well, which is that I do not think that we can afford to any longer spend resources, natural resources that we cannot replenish, making ever new buildings. Well, we have more than enough buildings. We should in all cases first reuse, rethink, reimagine what we already have. And I like to begin that thought with this work by the artist David Ireland, who bought a small house, worker's house, and didn't just restore it, but began peeling away layers of wallpaper to reveal the history of the place, covered what was left with beeswax so that it smelled of something rich and redolent of life, assembled what was left over of the fragments of the house, caressed every inch of the surface, and even left the marks of what had happened while they were doing this kind of work. I am seeing more and more architects and artists who see their work as an act of gathering together, of assembly, of collage, of bringing together what already exists and revealing it, bringing it into unconcealment, creating new sets of relationships, finding forms somewhere between architecture, furniture, art, and a kind of history lesson that holds out the promise of a future. As you heard in the introduction, a few years ago, I had the honor of directing the Venice Biennale. And if you haven't been there, I would strongly advise that you go there. It's an incredible event every year. But it's also an incredible waste. And we were trying to figure out what to do when I did it, because the central pavilion alone is about 18,000 square meters that you fill up, and then it is taken down after 6 months. And I already got to the point of not building any new walls, but Aravena, when he did the Biennale, made the whole structure out of the remnants of previous walls, reimagined to create a new scene, a new place for human beings to act. And as you go around the world, from Miami to Panama, you see artists who are bulging out and re-inhabiting existing structures, who are peeling away and pulling down what we might think of as the ugly parts of buildings, revealing what is there, reorganizing them, confronting us with that reality, piling them together into structures that represent the possibilities of architecture condensed into a single form, like the core that you bore out to the center of the earth, that reveals all of the history and all of the resources that are present under our feet. This was a work by Aaron Drake at the latest new museum Triennale, which brought home the notion of shelter by hanging a tent and bringing together the fragment. Oh my God! I guess I have to speed up. The fragments of the elements of architecture into a new set of forms. I love this work by Marjan Theeuwens, an artist who goes to buildings in the Netherlands and Belgium and Palestine that are about to be destructed or blown up, and reassembles the materials into a new possible world, photographs them, and that is the architecture that remains before they were bulldozed or blown up by the Israeli army. And this is a movement that has come into architecture very much from industrial design, when starting in 1993, a loose association of designers grouped together under something called droog design began realizing that we have more than enough stuff. We have enough chairs, we have enough chests of drawers, we have enough beds, we have enough vases. So instead, let's reimagine, reinvent what we have. A chest of drawer can be an assembly of leftover drawers that are put together with strapping tape, and a vase can be fragments of porcelain put together with plastic found on the dump. A very comfortable chair can be a chair made by piling up lots of rags on top of each other. You can create a crucifix, an emblem of your beliefs, out of the emblems of what was then all of the Fortune 500 companies, and call it the bling bling as our new religion. You can take a mass of car antennas or leftover silver trays, and one of the masters of this was one of the more successful architects who never made a building, Virgil Abloh, who got his architecture degree at IIT, but then started DJing and becoming a fashion designer, and unfortunately passed away much too young last year as the designer for menswear for Louis Vuitton. But he made these collaborations with Vitra in IKEA and did everything from music to fashion to building blocks, but never buildings, because they are too slow and, as he said, unjust. And I love this image one of my students sent me of a homeless encampment in Sacramento, where someone took the rug that he had designed for IKEA that says "keep out," itself a commentary on ownership and domesticity, and was repurposing it as part of this homeless shelter. Here's a project by Super U Studio, who took a Volkswagen car and condensed all of its materials into a series of cubic elements in proportion, and then thought of it as a new kind of urbanism, a reimagination of the future. And this has been going on in architecture for a while now. I'm hoping to do the US Pavilion for the Venice Biennale about this next year. I am looking at architects like Ben Nicholson or Perry Culper, who have seen their work as gathering together the fragments and elements of architecture to create possible worlds, other worlds, in the work of someone like Anton Marcus Pussing, that careen out of current possibilities, that imagine a complete restructuring of reality, that have a sense of an organic reality that can even be made. Am I pointing this the wrong way? Oop. That can even be made. Okay. Well, I'm losing something here. That can even be made Am I running out of batteries, or what is going on here? All right, well, possible other realities that could be made out of the leftover solids of architectural history that can be thought of as a reassembly of the history of architecture, including postmodernism, and that could even be in this series called The Emperor of Ice Cream, after E.E. Cummings' poem, an assembly of all of existing plans. I taught a studio once in which I told my students, not only can you not use any new materials, you have to use only plans of existing buildings. There is no such thing as invention. You have to think of your work as a reinvention. And so, as we begin to tear away at the monuments of architecture produced by dead white males, we can even begin to imagine that all of the air in Bangkok and all of its pollution could be gathered together into a new kind of mountain that is crystalline and open. And it is work that has a serious social agenda, like in this Heidelberg project in Detroit, which is an assembly of all of the leftover materials of this area, creating a new kind of cultural center, or work that Urban Think Tank did in South Africa, where they brought together the galvanized metal and the fabrics and everything else they could find in Durban to create a new community. And it's not just about the romantic dead tech and ruin porn that is becoming more fashionable. I love this project by Rotor DC in Belgium, where they go into even the most anonymous buildings, the buildings we all love to hate from the 1990s and 1980s, and find all of the leftover furniture and tiles, figure out how to detoxify it, and then sell it in an IKEA-like catalog so that you can repurpose it. Anything can be made into built form. You can create a homeless encampment out of tents. You can expand your building by reassembling leftover doors and windows. In the Netherlands, there's a firm called SuperU Studio that has something they call the harvest map that help you find everything in your environment that could be a building, including all of the leftover sinks that can turn into a house, or leftover washing machines that can turn into a restaurant, tire tracks and car seats that can turn into a rock and roll club, leftover fragments of buildings that can turn into an art school. This is another Belgian firm called De Vlinder Velk-Tailleux, which completely opens up existing structures, creates scaffolding within them, creates the possibilities of new use, and when they have to make something new, they bring in existing technology. This is an old psychiatric hospital that had fallen into ruin, that they reinvented as a new place for mental health, where the very openness and instability of the space would help you find your way to reality. Architects everywhere are digging at existing buildings, revealing the beauty of what is there, opening up some of the most exciting spaces I've seen in a long time, clawing away to bring textures out, to bring light in, to open spaces up all around us. This is a building that's now under construction. It was one of the houses of the Lee family. The Lee family not only produced the leader of the Confederacy, Confederate armies in America, was a war criminal, but it also was a family that was the largest slave-owning family in Virginia, the state where I live. And this house is now being turned into a visitor center that will literally reveal the past and everything that is part of it. And even architecture schools like this one in Shanghai can be reinventions of leftover places. I find myself traveling around the world And I'll give you a very quick overview of some of the places where I've been in the last few months. In Poland, staying in the former office building of Prudential Life Insurance Company that has been turned into one hotel. And then in Mexico City, staying in the former house of a photographer right behind the cathedral, where the ruins now weave in between new forms to create a hotel. And then right here in Bangkok, even though I did not get to stay here, the beauty of the Samson Hotel, a former Notel hotel, now turned into a place for entertainment and staying for many different classes of people, from a youth hostel all the way to a fancy hotel room with the scaffolding that brings out all of the possibilities of the building. This is a building that I judged when I was on the super jury of the World Architecture Festival right before COVID happened. The World Architecture Festival chooses the best hotel and the best house and the best restaurant and the best landscape and the best solar panel in the world. And then all those best are brought to a super jury to pick the very best architecture in the world. And we picked this building in the Netherlands that's a former tram depot that now has turned into a library and community center made only out of recycled materials. And to make it even better, it is a completely open and fluid and socially accessible space that is conditioned, think about that Rem Koolhaas quote, that is conditioned only when people are present, that brings heat and cooling only when it is in use. And I bring you back to the world of the evil overlords who are producing all of the fluidity in our world. This is the new headquarters of Facebook. And when Mark Zuckerberg saw that Apple had built this glorious new building, the greatest architecture from an English lord, no less, he felt that he needed to make a new statement about what Facebook was, or now Meta. So he went interviewing all of these different architects, and he walked into Frank Gehry's office, and he saw the messy renovation of an existing warehouse using plywood and leftover materials to create a place to make architecture. And he looked at this and said, I want this. Give me 2 million square feet. And by now it's up to 4 million square feet. So even at the scale of large office buildings, we are beginning to see this focus on renovation. This is the heart of industrial Europe. The Zollverein in Germany at the Ruhr Valley, that once was the great industrial engine, now turned into vegetable gardens and beer gardens and swimming pools and a museum and a business school and everything else like it. And this is the site of the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. What was once the largest steel mill in the world, now converted into the site of the Olympics, and soon a whole new neighborhood in the sprawling outskirts of Beijing. And of course, if you ask the question, what is the most successful architecture, not the most beautiful, not the most perfect architecture of the last 10 or 20 years, it would have to be the High Line in New York. Not only because for an investment of less than $200 million, it produced over $15 billion of real estate value, but also because it opened up a whole new way of seeing and experiencing the city that everyone could now enter into and find themselves cruising through the old warehouses and office buildings. And it's now being imitated all around the world, in Atlanta, in shopping malls that are an old Sears headquarters connected to their very own beltway, and on the outskirts of Copenhagen, in piers that have turned into places of enjoyment now that the harbor has been cleaned up. And another one of my favorite projects in Mexico, they have a national agency that built tens of thousands of units of social housing every single year that are horrible little boxes for the very poorest people. And a new director came in, gathered around architects, and they said, we don't need to build more of these houses. What we need to do is to open them up, to create a true sense of community, to create the fluid resources that will allow us to reimagine our reality. And at the other end of the spectrum is the former home of the founder of Zappos, who unfortunately also died very young, which he made by gathering together as a series of trailers right in the middle of downtown Las Vegas. And it can be as simple as gathering together some leftover tiles in the back of a park in Germany and finding a sculpture and putting a beehive on it so that the bees occupy it again, and then making a place where a poet or an architect can gather a community around. Of course, corporations have discovered that they can do this as well, that Nike and Adidas can bring alive the city just with the use of some paint. And this is a structure where I love to tell a little story, which is of a young firm in the Netherlands that got a commission right out of school to design a new city square in a small town. And they were good architects, so they went and they did all their research. They interviewed all of the inhabitants. They looked at the geology and the climate and the wind conditions and the bus patterns and the traffic patterns. And they analyzed all of this, and they made a big, thick report. And on the last page of the report, it says, do nothing. Leave it exactly the way it is. Architecture is a way of figuring out what is there and how to just adjust that reality. And by the way, here's our bill for $20,000. This is the newest public space in Barcelona. Many of us grew up with Barcelona producing grand squares that were the model for the rest of the world. But this is on the outskirts of the city in a very poor neighborhood that just happens to have a great view of Barcelona. And the architects here said, just tear down enough of the illegally built houses and leftover gun emplacements from the Second World War that you can see the view, but leave just enough so that you can't kill yourself. You can hurt yourself, but you shouldn't be able to kill yourself, and created this space. So I'm interested in architecture that doesn't build, but unbuilds, as the architect and artist Gordon Mother Clark would put it, that opens up new possibilities, that spirals out of our existing condition, that reveals what we so often hide, don't want to look at, don't want to understand, that sees itself as a reassembly and a revealing of the mass-produced and anonymous elements that hide within our buildings, that is perhaps just a cracking open, a disturbance, a ripple in our current reality that might be no more or no less than a glitch in the matrix that reveals the artificiality of our world. This, some of you might know, is the Torre David, a 45-story skyscraper in Caracas in Venezuela that sat unfinished for 15 years until it was taken over by a group of people who occupied it all the way up to the 25th floor. And in that space, they created a community with its own logic, its own stage sets for activities. They reimagined a place of business as a place of community. And the architects for an urban think tank went in there thinking they would use their skills in architecture to make this place better, and realized what they really need to do was to work with the photographer Iwan Ban to show what was going on, to look seriously at what this reality was. I always tell my architecture students that architecture is first and foremost seeing, and then knowing what you see, and then knowing what to do with what you have seen. And so my perspective is that I am less interesting standing at the bottom of the great skyscrapers and all of the fancy new buildings that are being made all around the world. I'm interested in the perspective of these crazy Russian kids who climb to the top of the tallest skyscrapers around the world and photograph themselves dangling over the ledge, looking at the full richness and possibility and contradiction and beauty and mess of the world that we already have, that we just need to see. And I have been working in the last few years in commissioning architects and artists to reassemble the trash of Shenzhen to show the possibilities in that city. And for 5 years, I ran the architecture school that Frank Lloyd Wright had started at Taliesin and at Taliesin West. And at Taliesin West, he originally had worked with the students, apprentices as they were called, to create a way to live in the sprawling world of Phoenix and Scottsdale that consisted of taking the stones that were already there, using as little cement as possible made out of the sand right there to create what he called desert masonry, and then buying a tent that was originally designed for shepherds, placing that on top of this base. I worked with our students who had to all create their own shelters before they graduate and live in them. And this was one student who, as you might have guessed, had worked for MVRDV. So he created a version of this desert shelter in which the desert masonry was printed on glass and the canvas of the tent was printed on metal, so that at night it would glow, with the bottom being this translucent place and the top being this solid support. Other students gathered together the fragments that were left over in the desert, the leftover body parts and condoms and beer cans and truck tires and everything else they could find to create their shelters, or saw their work in the shelter as just reassembling existing lean-tos and using diachronic film to create a different, a fantasy, an other world within its confines. And one of the last ones before they shut us down was a reuse of an old shelter in which the student brought together all of the dead material, as well as pieces of cars and everything else he could find, to create a new way to be at home in the modern world. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. How can we reimagine, rethink the world we already have? How can we take the leftover of our freeways, the leftover of our buildings, the leftover of our dreams of creating a utopian reality? How can we re-imbue that with the incredible fantasy, the incredible possibility that crosses our eyes every minute of the day on all of the many screens we use and embeds itself in our imagination? How can we be inspired by the artists and architects who have looked through all of those worlds, looked at everything that is already always around us, and imagined that out of this, out of our reality, reimagined, we can create a world that will be infinitely more sustainable, will be open and socially just, and will be beautiful. Thank you. Reassemble.
Thank you, Professor Betsky, for a very inspirational lecture. I know I speak for not only myself, but many of the people here and at home, that you have been a teacher to many of us throughout these years. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to talk to you this morning.
I guess I should put my mask back on.
I'm not sure if it's going to interfere with the microphone, though.
Oh, okay, okay.
Not sure where to begin, really, because there's so many notes that I've taken. Even before coming here, during the lecture, notes of my own from 20 years ago when I was doing a thesis in LA and reading some of your books. But maybe I want to talk about a little bit on the relationship I found between the sprawl and the Apple Park, and maybe the Hirshhorn Center. When we're talking about what is not necessarily beautiful. So maybe if you could elaborate on the Hirshhorn in particular, because I'm linking it because of the form, actually. Of course, Apple Park is much, much larger. It is very different in terms of program, but it's always a kind of running joke in architecture school that you always do a circular building once.
Yes.
So it does come across to me that something that is a little bit like a non-hierarchical, as a kind of donut form, has no direction, no particular clear entry, something that is uniform, kind of on the outside edge and perhaps inside edge. How do you perhaps pick up on the Hirshhorn? How do you see it as something you were calling ugly?
I think there's I would use a more traditional architecture critique to answer that question. The Apple building is actually quite beautiful. I think it is wrong on many levels, but as a shape, it is beautifully designed from every doorknob all the way to the overall form. The Hirshhorn is not. The Hirshhorn is a very badly proportioned building that has no relationship to its setting, which is a very important one, the National Mall in the United States, and that is completely closed, not only literally, but also semiotically in terms of what it says. The Apple building tries to be completely transparent. And when you read or listen to what Norman Foster said about it, he saw it very much as this open, fluid, non-hierarchical space. But it, as I tried to say, it shows the limits of architecture, because no matter how big it was and how hard they worked to make it beautiful and open, it showed the limits that the circle has. And it's a whole nother discussion. I think, I forget who it was I was talking about with yesterday or the day before, that I don't think architects should be allowed to use diagonals until they are well along in their career. And it's only when they reach, when they're starting to get Alzheimer's disease, like de Kooning, that they can make swirls and curves and circles and things like that. It's very difficult to contain those kind of forms. And I think on a more fundamental manner, one of the difficulty is that that kind of a circle is the emblem of an architecture that is thought of as the imposition of a perfect form on an imperfect world. It is thought of by the God's eye view, which of course is the architect being God, or thinks that they're God, looking down at the world and saying, I have the perfect shape to put on this landscape. And it doesn't matter what is happening on the ground or what the materials are. You just look from the top and you impose that kind of perfect form.
And that in relation to the sprawl, which has no particular ending. It just kind of goes in its kind of uniform density way all around. But at maybe street level or experiential level, it is somebody's maybe like beauty.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Sustainable way of life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I should be clear, I don't think that we can get rid of sprawl. And part of what I was trying to show is that there are artists and television makers who are, as always, way ahead of the architects in looking at sprawl and finding a beauty within there and saying, look, this is what we have made, this is what we are. Now, what do we do with it? It's not going to go away. You know, there are conservative architects who would like to pretend that they can make it all go away and turn back the clock to the 1920s or something 100 years ago. But it's not going to go away. There's a logic to it, an economic logic, a social logic. So we have to figure out what to do with it. And I am working on a research project right now at Virginia Tech where we are trying to catalog and other people are doing the same thing, what are the elements of sprawl? Let's actually look at them because, again, most architects live and work in a downtown and are trained to think of perfect shapes. Artists and filmmakers are a little bit different in that they look at the sprawling reality and try to transform that, give it a story. And for us, I think, for designers, the question is how can we create a more sustainable, more livable, more socially just version of sprawl and find a beauty within it that's not a perfect circle, but that actually comes out of the messy reality of sprawl.
I made a link between these three images, you know, the Apple Park, the Hirschhorn, and the sprawl, because I feel like many of us are probably not going to design something like the Apple Park. We are probably in our room, in this room, and at home, closer to the reality of living ourselves, you know, in the suburbia, growing up in one of these sprawls, probably be designing or renovating a house in the sprawl, or working around the city with an existing building such as the Hirschhorn that we cannot really do anything about, and you know how we as architects are asking ourselves about ways to engage with it. So yeah, that's kind of my question on kind of linking your images together. I would like to address the floor a little bit. We have a microphone stationed in the middle of the room, and I would invite some of our audience members to ask questions if you would like at the microphone back there in the 7th row. So please, if you have any question.
While we're waiting for that, for me, like the perfect architecture project, if I was teaching in Thailand, would be to take this center, this edge city here, with the expo center and the hotel and the arena and everything, and ask the question, what could you do with this, to this, around this, that would create a livable community in this area? How could you break through the isolation that it currently has? Yeah.
You know, it took me a long time to accept that something like this can be considered an interesting site for building. I think that right out of architecture school, being educated in the West, in the US particularly, I came back here to Bangkok thinking, how ugly is this, right? And like, you know, why are we still doing this? When we have gone from modern to postmodern, we have kind of queered our way out of that and, you know, denying kind of the value of all this. But I think that I'm in the position now to recognize that, yes, this is what we build from.
And we have to do something with it.
Yes.
Yep, yep.
I have a question.
Of course you do.
Of course I do. Well, you know, architecture moves at a snail's pace, right? Very, very slow.
Buildings move at
Building, yes. And then, well, traditional form of architecture, right? Buildings. But while, you know, filmmaker and artists, you know, you said explore reality, and then they can move much faster in the pace. When you then said, you know, beyond building or just don't do it, how can architects adapt or learn from artists and filmmaker in their, and apply it to their work?
Well, and this is where, to be clear, my position is maybe not a very popular one for a National Association of Architects, But if I were president for a day, I don't dare say king in this place, but in America I say if I were king of America for a day, I would forbid all new buildings. I would say no more new buildings. We cannot afford to use up the resources that we cannot replenish to make new buildings. And the reality is that that's already what architects are doing more and more. We like to think, and we were talking about this last night, part of the brainwashing of going to architecture school and becoming an architect is that you're not a real man or woman, although the tradition is very much still the man, unless you have made either the tallest possible building or the fanciest museum or theater possible. Whereas in reality, most architects will design interiors, additions, restaurants, places that change very, very quickly. And in the United States, Europe is already much further, but even in the United States, the president of your equivalent of the ASAA in America, the AIA, predicted 2 years ago that by 2025, 30% of all of the work that licensed architects will do will be either restorations, renovation, rehabilitation, historic fixing up of one form or the other. And in Europe, it's already well over 50%. So I would sort of turn that around and say I think that as a discipline and as a profession, we need to get out of the myth of slow building and making monuments that last forever when in reality buildings need to be renovated, changed almost as soon as and often even before they're finished. And we need to think of architecture more in the world of a showrunner for Euphoria or Game of Thrones, or more like a sustainable version of Zara and Uniqlo, and things that work and then we recycle them and we do something else. Architecture needs to be faster, flexible, more ephemeral, and not hung up on pouring a lot of concrete and putting a lot of steel together.
Does this present an opportunity for the architects to be more hands-on with the making?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I ask this question because I have a particular kind of issues or curiosity rather about the architectural profession. As you know, there's a kind of big controversy about the unfair payment of the labor and the employment of architects, and it's universal. So by kind of removing the architects from the office and maybe allowing them to be participating in other dimensions of building hands-on, or even going on to events making, do you think that it is, maybe you'd like to want to ask you to address that issue?
Yeah, no, I think we need to have a broader sense of what architecture is. One of the two slides that somehow got swallowed up by whatever was happening in the middle of my talk was two images I took yesterday in this restaurant that was designed here in Bangkok by an Austrian architect who studied with Zaha Hadid and got his license and degree and moved here and now renovates buildings, designs furniture, has a restaurant, which is a wonderful place, but does not make buildings, but has found an expanded definition of what it is that he can do with his background and knowledge. And I think that like Virgil Abloh, this is more and more the model. And look, again, I can talk about this in a romantic way, about this beautiful sort of, retro chic restaurant, but I can also talk about the economic reality that in many of the big schools in America and now also in Asia, if you look at the cream of the crop, the best students, they don't wind up becoming architects. They wound up going above all else into the gaming industry and special effects industry. I was on reviews at SCI-Arc, and I found myself sitting next to Brian Ferrin, who is a very famous, a person in special effects and all those kind of things. And I said, what are you doing here on a review at SCI-Arc? And he said, I pay this school a lot of money every year so that I have the privilege of being on final reviews and buying the best students and paying them, $150,000 to start, and they go into that world. Is that good? Well, maybe if we can imagine that after a generation of this going on, and I have a thesis student who's working on this, you can imagine that there will be some criticality, and there will be gaming design that will be not corporate, that will find another mode. And a lot of my best students are thinking about this. So economically, there's a huge world of possibilities in which someone who has the incredible skills and knowledge, the syncretic skills and knowledge that architecture offers, that they can now apply to a much array of possibilities. And as a discipline and a profession and as schools, we often fight that and say, no, you have to go design suburban office buildings or condos. And in reality, I think we should be encouraging that opening up and the possibilities of what we can do with the beautiful discipline that is architecture.
If I may ask a little bit more about this thesis project that your student is working on. Basically, it's designing a game engine. What are your recommendations? What are some of the questions that you're asking him?
So he has a very interesting, he's a gamer. He spends a lot of time, as he himself admits, he wastes endless hours gaming. But he's also a very, very good architect who has had 6 different firms trying to buy him as soon as he graduated. And his thesis project looked at, and I worked with him I said, okay, pick the 6 best games that you know. Now analyze the kind of spatiality and the kind of movement they have, which is very, very different, obviously, than Earthbound. But also look at the textures, the colors, the imagery, and ask yourself the question, what are they, why are they there? And in the end, his thesis is there is the town where he's from, Raleigh, North Carolina, is getting redeveloped by a big gaming industry that's moving there, Epic and Microsoft. And he says, okay, they're turning all of the city into unaffordable yuppie-dom. And he then imagined, in this game, you go through this world, which he's drawn beautifully, and then you find a secret door, and you go up, and there the gamers have created a parasitic world that exists in and above and through this reality. Now, can you inhabit it? No. But can it create a social community? Absolutely, because let's again face it, more and more of our sense of community, our social relations, our religious affiliations, our sexual relations are boosted, are carried out in this amorphous world of social media, etc. So he's there beginning to imagine that we can create a community that maybe someday we can extend into a opening up, a hollowing out, a reimagination of our existing reality. I couldn't get, he wouldn't give me his images yet because they weren't finished, or I would have shown them today.
Copyright.
Yeah.
I'm asking that question because I think that many of us, again, architects and architecture students, maybe need that confirmation that the experiences from your youth, or you're still in it right now, are worthwhile contribution to design. I know that the game actually has a lot of unimaginable effect and reach into your actual physical life. Some of the effects that are happening on the screen, the community you build on the screen and outside of the screen. Even some of like the toxic relationships are also very real.
And it's, it's funny because this year I was teaching second-year undergraduate students, and I asked them to start by drawing where they grew up as a child, what they saw when they opened their eye. And they all drew more or less the same suburban situation. But then I asked them to start to reimagine it. And it turns out that they were reimagining it somewhat with buildings they saw by surfing the internet on Architizer and places like that, but also with their favorite Korean series that they were watching in the corner of their screen while they were pretending to build models. And the two melded very much in their redesign. So it's not one or the other.
Yeah.
And that's what I was also saying at the beginning. When you imagine the architecture that you want to, that you've lived in your whole life, it's as much the architecture that comes from mass media and from your own memories and dreams and your misremembering of places. We were talking about my first trip to Bangkok and how I've misremembered some of the places and developed them incredible fantasies that have a reality. So it's that fluidity from memory and interpretation to reality and then back in continual spirals that I think is most interesting.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I've been exploring the concept of virtual architecture since 1997 through Columbia School of Architecture, and then through practicing with Hani Rashid on virtual Guggenheim and virtual Stocks Exchange, which never really went anywhere, to be honest, because the technology wasn't there. But at the school with Ed Keller, we also explore using the Unreal Engine, which was, of course, kind of like an early adaptation into architecture school. And we've been saying this for a long time without using the word. Harry Potter and Game of Thrones and Guardians of the Galaxy was really amazing examples of what virtual reality could become. And now the word metaverse, it's being, widespread, and people are saying it, and it's going to change the world. It's going to change, and it's definitely going to change architecture. How should the new generation, or even the old generation of architects, prepare themselves to be embedded into this new fluid world?
Well, I think most of us that are, over 50 should just realize we're dinosaurs and go away and die. But other than that, for me, the real task I like to give my best students an impossible challenge. I say, if you really want to do something great, use your skills as an architect to take your favorite social media, whether it's TikTok or Line or WeChat or WhatsApp or whatever it is, or Tinder or Grindr or whatever it is, and use your skills as an architect to make it better, to make it into something that is not the kind of McDonald's ugliness that all of these social media have as their default. And that's incredibly difficult. And your citation of Asymptote and Hani Rashid and Lisanne Couture is very important, because you're absolutely right. They started doing that. They developed the virtual New York Stock Exchange, which was built, and they did some of the earliest experiments, and some of their students have continued this kind of work. But for me, again, the problem with that avenue was that it was still looking for monuments. It was still trying to make the rarefied world of the Guggenheim or of the centers of, and now I've gotten 3 different people in the last month who have talked to me about wanting to do NFTs with architects creating luxury homes and all this. No, this is not the point. The point is actually to figure out how to transform the sprawl of the internet as well as the sprawl of reality.
If I can speak a little bit on social media a little bit, I noticed that you have a Twitter account.
Oh yeah, I'm barely use Twitter though. Somehow
Oh,
Twitter is
and
not.
you never tweet anything.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I've been checking.
Yeah. No, it's.
I know because I think that throughout your career, you have engaged with other media outside of architecture so well. You as a curator, you as a columnist, a critic, a writer, you've engaged with so much bigger dimensions and have reached a lot more people than just a client or the users of your building. Are you not excited to jump into the social media world?
Oh, I am, and I go in waves, and sometimes I will do a lot of Instagram and other kind of things. But I also, and this is maybe a little bit back to your question and my joke about being a dinosaur, but to a certain extent, I'm reality. It's a reality for me, because I also realize that I'm a critic and someone who looks and interprets, and in a very concrete way, I feel silly on TikTok. I mean, I consume a lot of TikTok, I consume a lot of Instagram and everything else, but I'm a guy with a suit and tie who belongs on Facebook. And that's where people are more or less my age.
I'm there too.
Yeah, and that's where people are more or less my age, and that's where I feel comfortable saying something. When I've tried to tweet or when I've tried to do things in Telegram, I felt completely out of place. And I don't want to force that. It's like, it's why though I love dancing, I never go out dancing anymore, because I feel, I did go to Coachella, and I found a place where I was surrounded by people and I could dance all I wanted. But you have to be very careful because everyone will have a camera, so you have to. But I think you have to be very conscious of your position in this world and not pretend to be hipper than your students.
That's exactly my sentiment. I'm not on TikTok either. I feel like this creator culture that we are in, generations growing up and being comfortable on the camera, on the phone, broadcasting.
Yep.
That's the architects that we're grooming
Yep.
to be. And maybe some of the questions that we've been asking ourselves are easier answered by them. Maybe they have freed themselves from the aesthetics of the control of what a good video should look like, or what is the most politically correct thing to say.
Yeah.
So,
and it's amazing to me that the average white American kid and probably half of the Thai kids identify themselves through Kanye, Drake, Lil Baby, Gunna, Gucci Mane, all these kind of, well, now these are already old. Lily Baby, maybe, Montero, yeah. And so this is very strange when you think about it. Here is, a white American kid identifying as a black rapper. But what's even stranger is if you put on your headphones, the radicality, which is, and this is the reason why I also listen to a lot of rap, especially the kind of Atlanta sound, some of the drill, some of the stuff now coming out of LA, the new generation, is you put your headphones on and it makes the experiments that Stockhausen and Philip Glass and people like that were doing 20 years ago seem like so staid, because the kind of aesthetic that are coming out of that, the willful dissonances, the layerings, the collage aesthetic, again, it's so far beyond what architects are doing. So maybe back to an earlier question, and again, I just listen. I don't rap, I just listen. But if if you asked me what we should be doing, if an architect today could figure out how to take what Lil Baby is doing, and turn that into architecture, I would be amazed.
Sounds like a studio brief.
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
We have a question.
Yeah, somehow. Well, welcome back to Bangkok again.
Thank you.
Well, maybe a lot of the audience here didn't know that I invited him, Aaron's here, I think 18 years ago, like 2004, 2005. And he's back. I mean, I know Aaron since I studied in Holland, where he was the director of the Netherlands Architecture Institute. And perhaps this is kind of a dinosaur's question somehow, because we like somehow belongs to the generation, let's say. I mean, looking at your work, I mean, well, back 20 years ago, you came here and you're talking about the false flat, right? And listening to your lecture today, there were some connections between that past, what you're saying, and today. But it's, I think, around 10%. 10%. So it changed the views and some stuff that give impact to architecture. It changed from back there to then. And my dinosaur question would be, what do you think would be the next big thing? Because NFT is already old, right? Like
right.
TikTok is already old. What
right.
do you think? I mean, for a person that's traveling the world, what is the next big thing?
Well, this is what I was trying to show, is that all of the best work that I've seen in the last few years has been a particular kind of renovation and reuse and reimagination of existing structures that do not just cover it with something new, but that bring out the potential, the ghosts, the memories of the past. And I was trying to show that I see this happening everywhere, not just in the Netherlands, where much of it actually started, but also in Poland and in Mexico City and here. And that's really the work that gets me most excited, not just because of the romance of it, but also because of the spatial and material innovation and the collage. And I'll even make a dangerous connection, which is that I was just talking about rap, and of course one of the beautiful things about rap is that the basis is sampling and a series of collage fragments that are deformed, reformed, given two things. One is a bass beat, like, you know, I want to know who the unnamed bass player is who plays on Donda and Life of Pablo and all of Kanye's last work. It was like unbelievable. And then a narrative, a story, an evocation. Guess I'm spending the night in jail tonight. A kind of Baroque thing that Montero did. That is built on top of that, out of that, weaves on that. So that reimagination, bringing together, sampling, assembling, that then is given the equivalent of a rhythm and is drummed into you, and then is given a story, a life, an evocation. That is what is most exciting to me. And when I see that happening, that's when I get most excited.
How do you think we can get more of that? Is it by, is it through education of our students, education of our audience, maybe our clients or users? What do you?
Well, I think it's already happening. It's the logic of it. Look, there will always be students and architects who just want to have a decent life and want to make money and, you know, support their family, which is fine. But the reality is that's becoming increasingly difficult. Architecture, like every other field, has divided more and more between automatic or semi-automatic tasks that are done by render farms with minimal intervention by very lowly paid people, usually in Asia, in the Philippines and places like that, and then a few architects at the top who make tens of millions of dollars. That traditional world of the journey person architect, someone who could make a decent living, someone who just did beautiful details in an office for their whole life and made a life doing that, who did one house at a time, once every year or two, that world is disappearing more and more. It's still possible, but it's shrinking. So the reality for students and for architects is that you have to reinvent and reimagine yourself in this much more fluid world in which architecture, I think, is now extending. So, like always, capitalism will show us the way.
How much time?
I got a thing that the time was up, so.
Okay. Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't see that. Okay.
Time's up.
Okay.
With a smile.
Yeah, yeah. Then it's not an aggressive message. The smiley always helps everything. So I have tons of other questions. Maybe we can continue this in a little bit of an informal session after. But I am thankful for the opportunity. I would like to extend our gratitude from the association to Professor Betsky for being here with us. Thoroughly enjoyable few moments with you from the other night also. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing me here.
Thank you. That was a very impressive, inspiring, and makes us reimagine, rethink, and reuse. So now I would like to invite Mr. 𝗕𝗂𝗁𝗂𝗵𝗃 to deliver a thank you gift from Mr. Betsky and also Kun Pratana on the stage. And we have a little bit of photo session, and then we have a break, and then we'll come back on 1 p.m. ตอนบ่ายโมงตรงนะคะสำหรับ session ต่อไป And the afternoon topic is about Craft of Collaboration by Samuel Barclay, principal and co-founder of Case Design. Okay, Mr. Betsky first. A very beautiful bag from Asa Expo. Okay, so we're going to have a photo session. May I invite Kun Chana Sampalang and also Kun Rashid Raden Ahmad on the stage. Thank you everyone for participating in this session. We'll come back on 1 p.m. with 2 sessions, Craft of Collaboration and Gorilla Repeating. Thank you. See you.